there are crimes that shock us, crimes that sadden us, and then there are crimes that seem to actively reject every logical explanation we try to give them. The murder of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey isn't just unsolved, it's unsolvable. And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly why experts say this case defies all logic. Picture this: a 6-year-old girl found dead in her own basement. A ransom note written like a Hollywood script. No forced entry. A crime scene that makes no sense. And a family that became suspects in their own daughter's murder. This isn't just a story about a child who died too young. It's about how a single night can unravel everything we think we know about truth, justice, and human nature. But here's what troubles me most. While millions of people have watched videos about this case, 98% of you watching right now haven't subscribed to hear more stories like this. Stories of children who deserve justice, families torn apart by tragedy, and mysteries that demand answers. If you're one of the 98% who watches but doesn't subscribe, I genuinely want to understand why. Hit that subscribe button now, or tell me in the comments what's stopping you. Because these stories matter, and your support helps us tell them. In the wealthy suburb of Boulder, Colorado, the Ramsey family seemed to have it all. John Ramsey, a successful tech executive worth millions. Patsy, a former beauty queen who channeled her pageant dreams into her daughter's rising career. And JonBenét, a 6-year-old with the poise of someone far beyond her years, gracing magazine covers and winning trophies taller than herself. Their 7,000-square-foot mansion sat in one of Boulder's most exclusive neighborhoods, a testament to success and security. JonBenét's world was one of sequins and spotlights, tiaras and talent shows. She sparkled on stage with a confidence that captivated audiences and judges alike. To the outside world, this was the American dream made manifest. Wealth, beauty, talent, and endless possibility. Christmas 1996 began like any other perfect holiday in the Ramsey household. The tree glittered with ornaments, presents were exchanged with joy, and the family prepared for their evening plans. That night, they attended a holiday party at the home of longtime friends Fleet and Priscilla White. It was warm, festive, filled with laughter and the comfortable familiarity of old friendships. The family returned home sometime between 9:45 and 10 p.m. JonBenét had fallen asleep during the drive, her small body exhausted from the excitement of Christmas and the late hour. John carried his sleeping daughter straight to her bedroom, tucking her into bed without waking her. By midnight, the house had settled into its usual quiet. John and Patsy retired to their room, Burke to his, and JonBenét to hers. The mansion that had hosted so much joy and celebration now held only the peaceful silence of a family at rest. No one could have imagined that this would be the last normal night the Ramsey family would ever know. Within hours, their world of privilege and protection would be shattered by something so horrific, so inexplicable, that it would haunt not just their family, but an entire nation. The perfect life they had built was about to become a nightmare that would consume them all. But what happened next would defy every pattern of criminal behavior ever studied. What happened next would create a mystery so twisted, so impossible to solve, that decades later, experts still can't agree on the most basic facts. What happened next would turn a family Christmas into America's most notorious unsolved murder. December 26, 1996. The morning that would echo through true crime history began not with screams or sirens, but with a mother's footsteps on a staircase. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey descended the back stairs of her home, preparing for an early morning flight to Michigan. The house was quiet, peaceful, exactly as she'd left it hours before. But on the staircase, folded neatly and impossible to miss, lay 3 pages of yellow legal paper, handwritten, addressed to Mr. Ramsey. As Patsy's eyes scanned the first few lines, her world collapsed. "We have your daughter," it began. The paper trembled in her hands as she read words that would become infamous. "Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction." At 5:52 a.m., Patsy's screams shattered the morning silence. At 5:53 a.m., she was racing up the stairs, throwing open JonBenet's bedroom door, finding only empty sheets and a cold, vacant room. At 5:54 a.m., she was dialing 911, her voice breaking with panic. "We have a kidnapping." When police arrived, they found a house already flooded with people. Friends, neighbors, even the family pastor had been called. They moved through rooms, cleaned dishes, offered comfort, unknowingly destroying potential evidence with every step. The crime scene was contaminated before it could even be secured. But it was the ransom note that truly baffled investigators. This wasn't a hurried demand scribbled in panic. This was a manifesto. 2.5 pages of bizarre, theatrical language that read like a movie script. References to a small foreign faction. Strange phrases like, "Don't try to grow a brain." Dialogue borrowed directly from action films like Speed and Dirty Harry. The demand was oddly specific. $118,000. Not a round number, not a massive windfall, but exactly the amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. An amount not widely known, not easily guessed. It suggested intimate knowledge of the family's finances, knowledge that few outsiders would possess. And yet, despite all the dramatic threats and warnings, there was silence. No follow-up calls. No instructions. No attempt to collect the ransom. The kidnappers who had written such an elaborate note seemed to have vanished without a trace. But the most disturbing detail? The note was written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, with a pen from the same house. Even more bizarre, investigators found what appeared to be a practice draft, discarded nearby. Someone had taken the time to perfect this letter, sitting calmly in the victim's own kitchen while the family slept upstairs. I have to pause here because this is exactly the kind of story that 98% of you watch without subscribing. You're invested in this mystery. You want to know what happens next, but you won't take 2 seconds to hit a button that helps us continue investigating cases like this. If you're genuinely interested in justice for JonBenét and other victims, prove it. Subscribe now, or explain in the comments why you refuse to support the work that brings you these stories. Hours passed. The house filled with more people, more contamination, more chaos. Police treated this as a kidnapping, not a murder scene. They didn't seal off areas, didn't conduct a thorough search, didn't question why the kidnappers remained silent. The basement, where the most crucial evidence lay waiting, remained unchecked. Then, at 1:05 p.m., everything changed. John Ramsey, accompanied by family friend Fleet White, descended into the basement. In a small, windowless storage room behind a latched door, John made a discovery that would haunt him forever. There, wrapped in a white blanket, lay his daughter's body. JonBenét had never been kidnapped. She had never left the house. She had been there all along, silent and still, while police searched for kidnappers who didn't exist and waited for ransom calls that would never come. But before detectives could secure the scene, grief and panic took over. John carried his daughter's body upstairs, destroying crucial evidence. The tape was removed from her mouth, the blanket disturbed, the crime scene irreparably compromised. What should have been preserved as forensic truth was lost to a father's desperate need to hold his child one last time. The kidnapping was a lie. The ransom note was a deception. And the real crime, the murder of a 6-year-old girl in her own home, was about to become one of the most confounding mysteries in criminal history. The evidence made no sense. The crime scene defied logic. And the questions that emerged would tear apart not just a family, but the very foundations of how we understand criminal behavior. When a child dies, we desperately want answers. We need someone to blame, someone to punish, some way to make sense of the senseless. In the JonBenét Ramsey case, 3 theories emerged, each one pointing to a different killer, each one seemingly plausible, and each one ultimately fatally flawed. The first theory was the most emotionally devastating. The parents did it. The RDI theory, Ramsey did it, gained traction almost immediately. The evidence seemed damning. The ransom note, written on paper from their own home with their own pen, filled with intimate knowledge of John's bonus. When handwriting experts compared the note to Patsy's writing, she couldn't be definitively ruled out. Their behavior, too, raised suspicions. They called friends and clergy before fully cooperating with police. Lawyers were hired within days. Interviews were postponed, conducted through legal filters. To many, this didn't look like a family desperate for answers. It looked like a family managing a crisis. The theory suggested that Patsy, in a moment of rage or frustration, had struck JonBenét. Perhaps over bedwetting, perhaps over some other childhood transgression. The blow was fatal, and everything that followed, the garrote, the staging, the elaborate ransom note, was designed to cover up a moment of parental violence gone too far. But this theory crumbles under scrutiny. There was no history of abuse in the Ramsey household, no credible reports of violence or neglect. JonBenét was well-fed, well-dressed, genuinely loved. Could parents really go from Christmas joy to murder and complex staging in mere hours? The garrote alone required time, precision, and an almost inhuman level of detachment. Could grieving parents really construct such a device while police were on their way? The second theory was even darker. Their son Burke did it. At 9 years old, Burke was the only other person in the house that night. This theory painted a picture of sibling rivalry turned deadly, perhaps over a bowl of pineapple found in the kitchen, perhaps over a Christmas toy, perhaps over nothing at all. The idea was that Burke struck his sister with a flashlight found on the counter, causing the massive head injury that would prove fatal. Everything else, the garrote, the staging, the ransom note, was his parents' desperate attempt to protect their only surviving child. Burke's later interviews seemed to support this theory to some observers. His demeanor was unusual, smiling while discussing his sister's death, giving answers that felt robotic and rehearsed. The flashlight matched the injury pattern perfectly, and it had been wiped completely clean of fingerprints. But again, logic fails. Could a 9-year-old boy construct the complex garrote used to strangle JonBenét? Could he create staging so sophisticated it fooled investigators for years? The injuries included evidence of sexual trauma. Could a child conceive of such manipulation? And could two parents really choose a lifetime of deception over a moment of truth about their son? And here's something that bothers me deeply. 98% of you are watching the story of a murdered child, invested in finding her killer, but you can't be bothered to subscribe to support more investigations like this. How can you care about justice for JonBenét, but not care enough to help us continue this work? Hit subscribe now, or at least have the courage to tell us in the comments why you won't. The third theory offered a different kind of horror. A stranger did it. An intruder theory suggested someone entered the Ramsey home, killed JonBenét, and vanished into the night. The evidence seemed to support this. Unidentified male DNA was found in her underwear and under her fingernails. A footprint near her body didn't match any family member. Strange circular marks on her body suggested a stun gun. The Boulder area had over 30 registered sex offenders within a few miles. The house was large, maze-like, with multiple entry points. The basement window had been broken previously. Perhaps someone had noticed, returned, and used it as an entry point. But this theory, too, falls apart under examination. There were no signs of forced entry, no fresh footprints in the snow outside, no disturbed cobwebs at the basement window. Most damning of all, what intruder breaks into a home, commits murder, and then sits down to write a 2.5-page ransom note using the victim's own supplies? The DNA evidence, once considered the smoking gun, has been questioned by experts who suggest it could be transferred DNA from factory workers who handled the clothing during manufacturing. It might have no connection to the crime at all. So we're left with an impossible puzzle. If the parents did it, they staged one of the most elaborate cover-ups in criminal history despite having no motive and no history of violence. If Burke did it, a 9-year-old boy managed to fool investigators for decades while his parents orchestrated a massive deception. If an intruder did it, they somehow entered and left without a trace while taking time to write a novella-length ransom note. Each theory answers some questions while raising others. Each fills some gaps while creating new ones. Each seems possible until you examine it closely, at which point it becomes impossible. This is why the JonBenét Ramsey case defies all logic, because every explanation requires us to believe in something that defies human nature, criminal behavior, or simple common sense. The truth is out there, somewhere in the spaces between these theories. But finding it requires us to accept that sometimes the most logical explanation is that there is no logical explanation. Sometimes the truth is stranger than anything we can imagine. They say the dead cannot speak, but in forensic science, bodies tell stories that words never could. JonBenét Ramsey's body told a story so disturbing, so contradictory, that even experienced medical examiners struggled to understand what had happened in those final, terrible hours. The autopsy revealed something that shocked investigators. JonBenét had died from 2 separate injuries, both potentially fatal. The first was a massive blow to the head, an 8.5-inch skull fracture that would have rendered her unconscious almost immediately. The second was strangulation from a garrote fashioned from one of her mother's paintbrushes and a cord found in the house. But here's what made no sense: the timing. The head injury came first, but JonBenét was still alive when the garrote was applied. She was unconscious, dying, but her heart was still beating. Why would someone strangle a child who is already fatally injured? Why use 2 methods of murder when one would suffice? The garrote itself was a puzzle. This wasn't a hastily constructed weapon born of panic. It was carefully crafted. The paintbrush had been broken in half, the cord wound with precision, the knots tied with deliberate force. Someone had taken time with this device, time to perfect it, time to make it functional. But functional for what purpose, if the victim was already unconscious and dying? Even more disturbing were the marks on JonBenét's body. Small, circular abrasions that some experts believed came from a stun gun. If true, this suggested premeditation, preparation, someone who came equipped to subdue a child. But others argued these marks could have come from any number of sources: a toy, a tool, even the train tracks found in Burke's room. The autopsy revealed something else that shattered any remaining innocence in this case: evidence of both chronic and acute sexual trauma. JonBenét had been violated before, possibly repeatedly, and again on the night she died. This wasn't just murder, it was a crime of sexual violence against a 6-year-old child. But even this evidence raised more questions than answers. Some experts argued the injuries were consistent with long-term abuse, suggesting someone close to JonBenét had been hurting her for months or years. Others contended the damage could have been caused post-mortem, part of the staging designed to mislead investigators. Her body had been wiped clean. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no blood on her nightgown or anywhere else in the house. Someone had taken care to clean her, to position her carefully on a white blanket in the corner of the wine cellar. Her favorite nightgown was found nearby, as if placed there deliberately. The bindings on her wrists told their own story of deception. They were loose, decorative, completely ineffective at restraining anyone, let alone a terrified child. The duct tape over her mouth was similarly theatrical. It could have been removed easily, served no real purpose except to create an image of captivity. I need to address something that's been bothering me throughout this investigation. Here we are, discussing the brutal murder of a 6-year-old child, examining evidence of sexual violence and calculated cruelty, and yet 98% of you watching this won't subscribe to help us continue investigating cases like this. You'll watch the horror, consume the mystery, but you won't support the work. If you truly care about justice for children like JonBenét, prove it. Subscribe now, or at least explain in the comments why you refuse to help. The most crucial piece of evidence was also the most controversial: the DNA. Male DNA was found in JonBenét's underwear and under her fingernails, but it wasn't a clean, complete profile. Instead, it was a mixture. Fragments of genetic material that could belong to one person or several, could be from the killer or could be completely unrelated to the crime. This DNA was used in 2008 to officially clear the Ramsey family, but that decision was immediately controversial. Mixture DNA is notoriously unreliable. It can result from innocent transfer, factory workers handling clothing, lab contamination, even accidental cross-contamination between samples. The fact that it didn't match any family member proved nothing except that it came from someone else, somewhere else, at some other time. The flashlight found in the kitchen became another piece of the puzzle. Heavy, metal, sitting conspicuously on the counter despite the family claiming they never used it. When matched to the indentation in JonBenet's skull, the size and shape were nearly perfect. It could have been the murder weapon, but it had been wiped completely clean. No fingerprints, no blood, no evidence of impact. Everything about the physical evidence suggested staging. The crime scene was too clean, too organized, too carefully arranged. Real crimes are messy, chaotic, marked by panic and haste. This looked like a crime scene designed to confuse investigators, to point in multiple directions while revealing nothing concrete. The body told a story of violence and violation, but it was a story written in a language that made no sense. Two causes of death, when one would suffice. Sexual staging that served no clear purpose. Careful positioning that suggested respect, mixed with unspeakable cruelty. A child's body turned into a prop in someone's elaborate lie. JonBenét Ramsey died sometime between 10 p.m. on Christmas night and 6 a.m. the next morning. But the story her body told was of hours of deliberate, calculated violence followed by meticulous staging. Someone had taken their time with her death, and even more time with the deception that followed. Some crimes are solved by brilliant detective work, others by lucky breaks or criminal mistakes. The JonBenét Ramsey case was destroyed by something far more common and far more tragic: human failure at every level of the system designed to protect children and deliver justice. From the moment police arrived at the Ramsey home, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The house should have been sealed immediately, treated as a crime scene, preserved for forensic analysis. Instead, it became a gathering place for friends, family, and clergy. People wandered freely through rooms, cleaned up dishes, used bathrooms, sat on furniture, unknowingly destroying evidence with every step. The decision to treat this as a kidnapping rather than a potential murder scene was the first fatal error. No thorough search was conducted. The basement, where JonBenet's body lay waiting, remained unchecked for hours. When John Ramsey finally discovered his daughter's body, it was moved, touched, contaminated before any forensic examination could preserve the scene. The investigation quickly devolved into a public circus. Details leaked to the media, creating a feeding frenzy of speculation and sensationalism. The Ramsey family, already dealing with unimaginable grief, found themselves tried and convicted in the court of public opinion before any evidence could be properly analyzed. Behind the scenes, the case was fracturing in ways that made resolution impossible. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office couldn't agree on basic facts, let alone on a prosecution strategy. Some investigators were convinced of family guilt, others pushed the intruder theory. Instead of a unified approach, the case split into competing camps, each working against the other. The Ramsey family's response to the investigation created additional complications. They hired high-powered attorneys almost immediately, refused to be interviewed separately in the crucial early days, and when they finally agreed to speak with police, their legal teams were present. Whether this was prudent self-protection or something more sinister became another point of endless debate. Burke, the 9-year-old boy who had been in the house that night, wasn't formally interviewed until weeks after the crime. By then, memories had shifted, timelines had blurred, and the spontaneous recollections that might have provided crucial insights were lost forever. The media attention was unlike anything Boulder had ever experienced. News trucks lined the streets, reporters camped outside the family home, and every detail of the investigation was dissected on national television. The case became entertainment, a mystery for the public to solve from their living rooms, rather than a child's murder that demanded professional investigation. This media circus had a devastating effect on the investigation itself. Police felt pressure to make arrests, prosecutors worried about public perception, and evidence was evaluated not just for its forensic value, but for how it would play in the court of public opinion. The focus shifted from finding JonBenet's killer to managing the narrative around her death. Years passed. Decades passed. New investigators took over the case, each one convinced they could solve what their predecessors couldn't. New theories emerged, old ones were discarded, and the evidence was reanalyzed countless times. But the fundamental problems remained: a contaminated crime scene, compromised evidence, and a case that had been turned into a public spectacle rather than a professional investigation. I have to be honest with you, this is exactly the kind of injustice that makes me question why 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing. Here's a child who is failed by everyone who is supposed to protect her, and you can't even be bothered to hit a button to support the work that keeps her story alive? If you genuinely care about justice for JonBenét and others like her, prove it.
Subscribe right now.
And if you won't, at least have the courage to tell us why in the comments. What's your excuse for consuming this content without supporting it? The case has been officially reopened multiple times, assigned to different agencies, approached from different angles. DNA evidence has been retested with newer technology. Old suspects have been eliminated, new ones identified and investigated. But each new effort runs into the same fundamental problem. The evidence was compromised from day one, and no amount of sophisticated analysis can restore what was lost in those first crucial hours. Today, nearly 3 decades after JonBenét's death, we're no closer to justice than we were on December 26, 1996. The case remains officially unsolved, though various law enforcement agencies have at different times expressed confidence in different theories. The Boulder Police Department has apologized for their handling of the initial investigation, but apologies don't bring back lost evidence or restore compromised crime scenes. The failure here wasn't just procedural, it was moral. A 6-year-old child was murdered in her own home, and the system designed to find her killer instead turned her death into a spectacle. The investigation became more famous than the crime, the theories more important than the truth, and the public fascination more valuable than actual justice. JonBenét Ramsey deserved better. She deserved investigators who protected her crime scene, prosecutors who followed the evidence wherever it led, and a public that cared more about finding her killer than consuming her story. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about how the system can fail when it matters most. The case defies all logic because it was never allowed to follow logic. From the moment that 911 call was made, emotion, ego, and incompetence took over. The evidence was scattered to the winds, the investigation compromised beyond repair, and the truth buried beneath layers of failure that may never be excavated. We may never know who killed JonBenét Ramsey, but we do know who failed her, everyone who is supposed to seek justice on behalf of a murdered child. The case remains unsolved not because it's inherently unsolvable, but because it was destroyed by the very people entrusted with solving it. This is JonBenét's legacy, not just the mystery of her death, but the tragedy of how that mystery was mishandled. She deserved justice, and she deserved better from all of us. The least we can do now is keep her story alive, keep asking questions, and keep demanding better from the systems that are supposed to protect our children. Thank you for following JonBenét's story to the end. If this case moved you, if you believe children deserve justice, if you think these stories matter, then hit like and subscribe. We have more stories that deserve to be heard, more victims whose voices need to be amplified. Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your final theory in the comments. And to the 98% who watch but don't subscribe, I genuinely want to understand why. Tell us what's stopping you from supporting this work, because these stories matter, and your engagement helps us tell them.